Sorry, before we get Kathy up here, I just wanted to say a couple of things. My name is Valerie Hellinghausen, and I'm the editor-in-chief of the Clear Creek Highlight newspaper here. And today I'm really honored to introduce you to one of my heroes and a very special guest. As we grow up, we're all asked who our heroes are, and more often than not, they're usually people who don't wear capes or have secret identities or have supernatural powers. For some of you, this may be your mom or your dad, and the person I'd like to introduce you today is kind of a Auntie Mame or mom to us all, and she would generously do anything for anyone and is not afraid to kick up her feet on your dashboard and just share a story from her crazy adventures in Africa or California. And she uses her own superpowers and creativity to change the world. So today, I've been given the privilege of introducing you to my hero. In my first year at Clear Creek, I was introduced to the Eldon family and their philosophies in my Journalism 1 class. Over the years, our journalism teachers at Creek, Miss Jameson and Miss O'Neill, have taught and inspired hundreds of students with the work of the Eldons and Creative Visions Foundation, in order to carry on the legacy of one young photojournalist and artist, Dan Eldon, who died before his time in Somalia. Dan has become the standard of excellence we all strive to meet so that we too may become more than just student journalists and learn to live life unedited. You may have heard of Dan from your own teachers, the hundreds of posters we've put up in the hall, and from his exhibit, which has been generally donated by our guest and is currently in the library. So, this exhibit is also going to be traveling through Clear Creek ISD, so if you don't get a chance to go check it out, you can go look at it in one of our other high schools. Dan Eldon and his family's work has inspired people and me and just amazing people around the world, including Christopher Nolan, the director of Batman trilogy, Inception, anybody? And Blake Cassidy, the founder of Tom's Shoes, and the founders of Invisible Children, just to name a few. The Eldons have always emphasized using your own creativity and talents to change the world and become creative activists. Dan himself always emphasized safari as a way of life, and the journey is the destination. He was a firm believer in exploring all that life had to offer and to escape routine in order to get lost in the incredible adventures that await us just around the corner. Today, I'm pleased to introduce you to Dan Eldon's mother, a visionary inspiration, the original creative activist, and the epitome of forward motion. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me in welcoming our special guest, Kathy Eldon.
Okay, we'll get this thing going. Sorry. Thank you. We'll see if it works. First of all, whoa, is it on? No, it's not on. I don't think so. No worries, we'll figure it. Sorry. I flew in from California yesterday, and Miss Jameson got me up at 5 in the morning, which is really 3 in the morning for California. So I've already done like 4 presentations, so I'm really inarticulate and pathetic, and I'm just telling you right now, it's okay. You can fall asleep or whatever high school people do at early assembles. It's perfectly all right with me. But I'm going to try to keep you awake, I really will. We wanted to show you a short extra clip because it's all about celebrities now, really. I mean, nothing really works without celebrities. So we're going to try to show you, but the sound system's a little tricky, so we're going to put the microphone up to this thing, and we're going to cross our fingers. So here we go. Exorcism part 2. No. Oh my gosh, this is so classic Dan stuff. You know, I call him a noisy spirit, but how he managed to get exorcism instead of the extra thing, I do not know. But we're going to try a little harder. So, here we go. Okay, I'll just pretend I'm Julia Roberts. Okay, so, why don't we just run it? Because at least people will know. I hope you're sitting comfortably. It's horrible when you have a plan and it goes terribly wrong, but that's life. Dan's philosophy was the journey is the destination. What does that mean? There is nothing else but this particular journey. My destination was to have a 17-minute film where I wouldn't have to talk at all. And when I came, they said, no, let's just do the 2.5-minute one. So I said, okay, that's fine. And now we haven't got the 2.5-minute one. So okay, we're going to start right here. When I was born in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. This will just take you a couple of hours. I'm very old, so we'll start when I was born and just work slowly through my entire life. Born in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Wanted to get out of Iowa. Those cornfields were really oppressive to me. So I married an Englishman. That was a really cool plan to get out of Iowa. And I did love him. So I moved to London and had 2 children, Dan, and 4 years later I had Amy. We moved in, I found the suburbs of London to be almost as oppressive as the cornfields of Iowa. And we managed, when I was 30 years old, and Dan was 7 and Amy was 4, to move to Nairobi, Kenya. Now, if you can imagine Africa, the bulge over here of East Africa is Kenya. So we moved from London to Kenya, and my life exploded. Having been a boring suburban housewife, I became a young journalist in Kenya. And I would take my kids on adventures on safari in Kenya, and also I would take them along on my writing assignments. And I got to tell stories about the most amazing people, and they were nation builders. It was only 7 years after about 15 years after Kenya had been made an independent country. And they were all excited about turning this raw, undeveloped land into a proper country. So I told stories about creative, active people who did not ask permission to do what they wanted to do. If they needed to build a school, they built a school. If they needed to start an organization to do something that needed to be done, they did it. They didn't always get licenses or permits. They just rolled up their sleeves and they made things happen. I found this hugely inspiring. And my son, Dan, also found it inspiring. And in a country where there are very few social services, you kind of have to make it all happen yourself. So when Dan was about 14, 15 years old, a kid in the class, his class, who was a scholarship student who lived in the worst slum in Nairobi, and believe me, it is tough. The houses are made of cardboard boxes with some tin roof over it, and they're not houses at all, they're kind of lean-to shacks. This little girl came out of that environment into a school not dissimilar to yours, but she had a heart problem. And there was no money. Nobody was going to rescue this kid. So Dan started an organization called Operation Save a Heart. And he and his friends, through various legal and possibly not quite so legal means, like stretching it, managed to raise the money for a heart operation. And one thing that they did, which I think you might find amusing or inspiring, is they gave wild parties in our backyard. And we had a hut, which we called the Mkebi. It was like a tin can. And they gave the most wonderful parties, but to raise money for this little girl. And she eventually had the operation, and Dan realized the power of taking an idea and turning it into action. A year later, he adopted a family. There was a Maasai family. The mother was a fantastic woman. The father was a useless sort of character. They had 7 kids and no income. So Dan would go out every weekend. He would jump a ride on this matatu, which is a wild sort of vehicle of transportation with hundreds of people jammed into a tiny little space. And he would go out to their hut on Ingong Hills, and she made Maasai jewelry, this beautiful beaded jewelry. Dan would take it, go back to his school, sell it to absolutely everybody. People were draped with Maasai jewelry. He was relentless. But he created the income for this family and helped them help themselves. It wasn't like charity, here, I'm giving you money. It was, okay, what can you do to raise the money so that your kids can go to school? So he had one child, then he helped a family. When he was 19 years old, and he graduated from high school, it's like, okay, you're going to college now, right? He said, I'd really like to, I'd like to go maybe be an intern in New York for Mademoiselle magazine, then I'd like to travel. And I said, oh, you want to take a year off, don't you? And he said, no, Mom, I want to take a year on. It's way harder to learn when you're really engaged with the world around you than it is to just sit in a classroom. And as wonderful as that is, and I'm not telling you not to go to college, but I'm saying that there are other ways of engaging and learning. And he said, I can learn more bargaining in Mexico in a market about economics than I can maybe taking a microeconomics course in college. I want to go to Japan. I can probably, I want to learn Japanese, but it was like, here's what I want to do, and here's when I need to do it. So he had a plan, and we let him take the year on. And it's a really, I think it's a fantastic idea. And you have a teacher here, Jeff, I don't know Jeff's last name, but Cherry, who, Jeff Cherry, okay, who last summer went to Kenya and worked in our orphanage. We have an orphanage in Kenya. But I find that so engaging. That is really taking a year on. You have Gabby. What year is Gabby? Gabby is, can you raise your hand? Are you here? Gabby, over here. Gabby, I've been really excited about. Gabby was working with the organization called Starfish Kenya, and her church is taking groups out to Kenya to work in orphanages. Now, you don't have to go to Kenya to engage in the world around you. There's plenty you can do right here, obviously in Creek, whatever the name of the school is, Creek. I'm so confused with Clear Creeks and Cross Creeks and Swampy Creeks and everything else, but I know it's Creek. Anyway, there's so much that you can do. So Dan, when he was 19 years old, and he was at UCLA, decided that he wanted to go back to Africa. And he and his friend had driven their Land Rover, which was a 21-year-old Land Rover named Desiree, named after this wild Italian girlfriend he wished he'd had. Didn't really have her. But he named the Land Rover Desiree. She was really temperamental, always breaking down, just a rubbish car. But he had driven this car down to to Malawi with his friend, two friends. And when they arrived down there, they found this refugee camp with 14,000 refugees who had absolutely nothing. They were wearing the same clothes. The missionaries had sent one sort of bolt of clothes that all the little girls were wearing. But when they arrived there, they found that the children were incredibly happy and positive, and the adults were making the best they could possibly do of this awful situation. And he resolved to try to go down to take aid to this place, to not, again, as a sort of charity handout, but help people help themselves, because that's the whole point in life. You don't want to just make people feel powerless. So he called up his friends, he sort of rustled up this wacky group of 15 kids. Now, my daughter Amy was 15 years old when they went on this trip. She asked me now, Mother, why did you ever let us do this? Okay, it was across one war-torn country plus Kenya and Tanzania. The group included this guy, tall, lanky guy called Chris Nolan, whatever. Chris was the group photographer. There was another guy, Jeff Gettleman. Jeff was a skinny kid from Chicago. None of these kids had ever been to Africa. Girls, Team Desiree. Desiree, remember, the business of the vehicle. Free at last voyages. The search for clean water in a swamp. Think creek. Energy, sincerity, clarity of vision, creativity. Mission statement for safari as a way of life. To explore the unknown and the familiar, distant and near, and to record in detail with the eyes of a child any traces of beauty, any beauty of the flesh or otherwise, horror, irony, traces of utopia or hell. Select your team with care, but when in doubt, take on some new crew and give them a chance. Now, that sounds really kind of like, oh, he's so whatever, kind of boring. Whatever, it's a pretty powerful statement. He said in little bitty letters he said there's a little difference between being lost and exploring. So think about that. When you're lost and your GPS doesn't work, they didn't have GPS, if you shift it and think that you're exploring, then everything, your whole mindset shifts. And I try to use that because I have no sense of direction at any time. He said it is foolish and dangerous not to dance in Africa. And I take that as a metaphor for just being unafraid to make a fool of yourself. It's all good. And he says, look for solutions, not problems. This is a mission statement, and this is something we're going to, hopefully at the end of this session, you people may feel inspired enough to go out and create a mission statement for your life. And it doesn't have to be for your whole life, but for the next couple of years. And make it a grand adventure. Make it safari as a way of life. Safari it just means journey, and a journey into the unknown. And often your Land Rover breaks down, your compass gets broken, you run into a buffalo. A lot of really nasty things happen. Okay? So that is my advice to you, is to create your